Mr. Chairman, I have amendment number 3 at the desk.
Which amendment is it?
Number 3.
Okay, Mr. Cárdenas. All right. The clerk will report, and the staff will distribute copies.
An amendment offered by Mr. Cárdenas relating to immigration reform.
Yep, gentleman from California is recognized for 8 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Today we raise a simple question with this amendment. Are you for or against creating more than 100,000 jobs per year and $900 billion toward debt reduction? This amendment is the only amendment to this budget that would create jobs, supercharge our economy, and balance the budget all in one amendment. It deserves a fair majority rules debate today. Any serious debate on balancing our budget must include comprehensive immigration reform, since reform will cut the deficit by $900 billion over the next 20 years. Comprehensive immigration reform will also create over 100,000 American jobs each year in the first 10 years alone. I'm offering this amendment because there's no other amendment that will do such a thing. Comprehensive immigration reform deserves a fair majority rules debate and vote. The American people want comprehensive immigration reform, and they have told us that over and over again. Businesses want it, cops want it, and 68 Republicans and Democrat U.S. Senators voted for it because they all know it will help supercharge our economy. Voting for comprehensive immigration reform today, once again, will reduce our deficit by over $900 billion over the next 20 years. Again, over 120,000 American jobs every year just in the first 10 years alone. Right now, because of the unwillingness of House Republicans' leadership to allow for a debate, this is the only vote we can get on comprehensive immigration reform. The American people will and should hold us responsible for what we do here or don't do here today, and those who vote yes or no will have their names recorded on this vote. At this point in time, I'd like to yield 1 minute to Mr. Yarmouth from Kentucky.
I thank my friend from California. I had the privilege last year of serving as one of the 8 members of the bipartisan Gang of 8 working on comprehensive immigration reform, and I considered it a great honor. And one of the fascinating things about that entire process was that virtually everyone in this country, in an organized way, is for comprehensive immigration reform. The business community is for it, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, Wall Street, the high-tech community. It's hard to find anyone who's concerned about the economic future of this country that is not for comprehensive immigration reform and who does not consider it an essential element to continued growth in our economy. But I'm just going to close by quoting Jeb Bush of Florida from a Wall Street Journal op-ed, obviously a Republican. He said, "No Republican would vote for legislation that stifled economic growth, promoted illegal immigration, added to the welfare rolls, and failed to ensure a secure border. Yet they essentially will do just that if they fail to pass comprehensive immigration reform and leave in place a system that does all of those things." So I think we ought to agree with and underscore the words of Governor Bush and agree to the amendment before us. I yield back.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to yield 1 minute of my time to Michelle Lujan Grisham from New Mexico.
Thank you, Congressman Cárdenas. I thank you for the opportunity to speak on this amendment, which provides what this Republican budget excludes, a strong boost to the economy and a way to actually reduce the deficit. Comprehensive immigration reform would expand the size of the U.S. workforce and will grow the economy. CBO estimates that comprehensive immigration reform, like H.R. 15, would reduce the deficit by $900 billion over the next 2 decades and grow the national GDP by more than 5%. Just in New Mexico, passing immigration reform creates more than 6,000 new jobs, adds $201 million in state and local taxes, and increases New Mexico's economic output by more than $3.8 billion over the decade. But comprehensive immigration reform is not only an economic issue. It breaks apart families. It turns people away who would clearly make significant contributions to our country. Mr. Chairman, members of this committee, besides the positive effects to the economy and the budget, immigration reform is the right thing to do. We need to take a vote on immigration reform. This is likely the only chance members of the House will have to vote on this important issue. I urge my colleagues to support this common sense amendment. I yield back.
Thank you. I'd like to yield a minute to Lloyd Doggett from Texas. Congressman Doggett.
Thank you. On Monday of this week, a group of Republican business leaders gathered at the Texas State Capitol in Austin to ask for comprehensive immigration reform. They said they could not see the kind of expansion of their businesses that they wanted if we did not address the need for workers that they have. Now, I wish that a majority of this Congress would be moved by their hearts to adopt comprehensive immigration reform, would know what it means to tear a family asunder as a result of deportations, would have looked into the eyes of the dreamers and want to see their dreams achieve reality instead of turn into nightmares. But whether you're moved by your heart or by your pocketbook, there are real economic gains to be had through comprehensive immigration reform that no objective economist can deny. There is no good reason why we have not voted on the bipartisan Senate bill that has been pending in the House since last summer. Speaker Boehner needs to give us a vote. Today, we have a chance to go on record and present to the House the benefits of comprehensive immigration reform. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, I'd like to yield a minute to Congresswoman Castor from Florida.
Thank you. Colleagues, one of the most important things we can do for our economy is to pass comprehensive immigration reform right now. And three main reasons. The nonpartisan CBO has estimated that immigration reform would grow our economy and reduce our deficits by $900 billion over the next 20 years. Two, immigration reform will strengthen Social Security. The chief actuary for Social Security estimates that the 8 million individuals that currently work in the shadow economy would come out of the shadows and begin to pay into the Social Security Trust Fund. We would collect those taxes, and it would strengthen Social Security to the tune of $284 billion. And number three, we educate students from all across the globe. We train them in America, and then what do? Under our immigration laws, we send those scientists and engineers who earn PhDs at our universities back to their home countries. In doing that, these professionals will make their next great discoveries and products abroad instead of the U.S., so that doesn't make sense. For these reasons, please adopt Representative Cárdenas' amendment on comprehensive immigration reform. I yield back.
Thank you. Next, I'd like to yield a minute to Congresswoman Lee from California.
45 seconds.
Thank you very much, and I want to thank Mr. Cárdenas for introducing this amendment. And just associate myself with most of the remarks that have been made. Our immigration system, once again, we're saying it's totally broken. It's been broken far too long, and it's time to act. In my own district, there are heart-wrenching stories of families who come here for a chance at the American dream. That's what they want, only to be torn apart and separated. Today, we have the opportunity in this committee to support an amendment based on bipartisan legislation that has the support of the American people and the votes needed to pass our House. So, Mr. Chairman, it's time to get this done. We should at least do it here in this committee. Not only is comprehensive immigration reform the morally right thing to do, of course, it's the thing we need to do for our economy. Thank you again, Mr. Cárdenas, for this.
8 minutes are expired. I will claim the 9 minutes in opposition. Let me first start off by saying CBO is saying there's a growth dividend if you have the right policies in place. And so I think what is good and informative about this debate is that if we get our policies right, we can have more economic growth, and that will help the bottom line, revenues, lower deficits. So I'd like to acknowledge that there is improvement on CBO that we all should be thankful for, that if we get our policies right, we get better feedback. That's point one. Point two, what Barbara just said is correct. This is a broken system. The immigration system is broken. It doesn't work for anybody. Our laws aren't written well, so they're not enforceable, or those that are enforceable aren't being enforced. And it's helping nobody, and it's not helping this country. We are a nation of immigrants. Immigration is very important and vital to America. So that goes without saying. Here is our problem with this amendment. We don't support the Senate bill. The Senate bill is over 1,000 pages. We don't like this way of legislating to begin with, which is whenever Congress passes very important, significant legislation, we ought to know what we're voting on, and the American people ought to know what we're voting on. And we don't think that's the case here. A couple of other reasons that we don't like the Senate bill is We think it's very important to respect that person who waited patiently, who did everything right, who's waiting in line, who's paying the fines, and we do not want to preference a person who did not do that by putting them in the front of the line. We think it's important to respect the rule of law and that legal immigrant who's been patiently waiting and doing everything right in the first place. And that's one of the reasons why we don't support the Senate bill. The second reason is we believe that the better and preferred approach here in the House is this step-by-step approach that we've been talking about all along. We need to first secure the border, and we have to have interior enforcement. It's very important that those come first. Second, we need to have a fully functioning employer verification system and an entry-exit visa system that needs to be implemented. Third, we need to encourage legal immigration with a guest worker program, which helps our economy get the workers it needs, and it also takes pressure off of the border so that our border efforts at interdicting those we don't want to come in the country are more successful. And lastly, we need to give people a chance to get right with the law. That's obviously something that's got to be dealt with. And we have to do it in a smart way. We have to do it in a way that does not create an amnesty or a moral hazard so that we have the same problem 15 years down the road. And so what we want to get right is lasting immigration reform. A few of us have been around this issue a long time. Before my time, we had comprehensive immigration reform in 1986. That didn't work. Then we had comprehensive immigration reform in 1996. That didn't work. And we've been debating comprehensive immigration around here since 2006. This ultimately needs to be a bipartisan issue. It's a problem America needs to confront. And the way we think is the better way to go is to do it in this step-by-step way so that we get the sequence of these right, so that we have respect for the rule of law, that we honor legal immigrants, that we honor immigration, and that we know what we're voting on, and that we do it in a way that the country sees that it's a transparent process, and that it's, more importantly, a lasting reform that guarantees that we're not having the same problem 10, 15 years down the road. Chairman Goodlatte and Chairman McCall are already well on their way in this. They've already had a lot of markups on legislation. They're having lots of hearings. Those are the committees of jurisdiction. This is the Budget Committee. It's not our committee's jurisdiction to rewrite all the immigration laws. It is those committees' jurisdictions, and they're well into doing that. And the plan is to have a series of bills, not one big, massive 1,000-plus page bill, but a series of bills walking through what I just described. And we just think that's a far better approach, and that's why I urge a no vote on this amendment, and I'd like to yield 5 minutes, the remainder of the time, to Mr. Calvert.
Mr. Chairman, point of clarification. Sure. You referred to the Senate bill. My amendment refers to H.R. 15, House bill.
My understanding is that's the equivalent of the Senate bill. Is that not right?
They're not exactly the same.
Okay.
In fact, just for clarification, that bill incorporates Mr. McCall's bill into the, so in fact, this will be an opportunity to vote on Mr. McCall's bill at the same time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Still, nonetheless. Mr. Calvert.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And as you, we all agree that this immigration system is broken, and we need to fix it. But I agree, this is not the place to do it, not in the Budget Committee. I've been an employer. I understand the complexities of trying to deal with, as an employer, with the I-9 forms. That's one of the reasons I came up with the idea of E-Verify back in 1996. It was an idea just to allow employers to be able to check the potential status of an employee. And it's worked fine. It's worked well. We have half the United States employees now have gone through the E-Verify system. But the Senate bill, this comprehensive bill, has a lot of flaws in it. One of the flaws, quite frankly, is the bill requires entry-exit checks at sea and airports, but neglects land ports of entry. What a huge flaw. And in any bill that's 1,000 pages long, I think we found that out on the health care bill, is going to have problems in it. So we need to have incremental reform that the American people can understand. And I think border security, I think most Americans support that. We need to have border security for a number of reasons, national security reasons being one of them. We need to make sure we have a functioning verification system that's mandated, not just the voluntary system that we have today. We need to make sure that the visas are enforced when people enter this country for whatever reason. We need to enforce our visa laws, which we don't do at the present time. And we need to make sure that we have a system that we can work with these young people to give them an opportunity to have a pathway to citizenship. But this Budget Committee is not the place to deal with it. As the Chairman mentioned, Chairman Goodlatte, McCall are way on their way to have these incremental bills come forward as soon as possible. Unfortunately, they're not going to be coming up as quickly as some people would like, but this is not the place to bring up the Senate bill or the equivalent of the Senate bill, and we won't certainly support the inclusion of this language in the budget resolution, so I would urge a no vote.
We'll yield back the rest of our time. Mr. Cárdenas, you got a minute to close.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, earlier you spoke on the dire fiscal situation this country is in. I agree that we need to do more to balance our budget. I was required to do so when I was in the California State Legislature and the LA City Council. I know how hard it is to balance budgets. Comprehensive immigration reform will reduce our deficit by $900 billion. And also, this is the committee that we should handle it in, Mr. Chairman, just as you are using Medicare, rewriting Medicare to balance the budget as well in this committee. I would love to know, yes or no, Mr. Chairman, would you commit to support comprehensive immigration reform and ask Speaker Boehner to bring H.R. 15 to the House floor? That's the only comprehensive bill that we have in our House at this moment. I'd yield time for the Chairman. Okay. Chairman chooses not to answer. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, you've spoken on reform. I ask you to support my amendment and the $900 billion in savings it will bring. I ask my colleagues, make this a bipartisan vote. Send a message to Congress and the American public that we are ready for comprehensive immigration reform. Thank you. I ask for your aye vote.
Time for the gentleman has expired. The question is on the gentleman from California, Mr. Cárdenas' amendment. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. No. Noes have it. Gentleman wants to asking for a recorded vote. The clerk will call the roll.
Dr. Price? No. Dr. Price? No. Mr. Garrett? No. Mr. Garrett? No. Mr. Campbell? No. Mr. Campbell? No. Mr. Calvert? No. Mr. Calvert? No. Mr. Cole? Mr. McClintock? No. Mr. McClintock? No. Mr. Langford? No. Mr. Langford? No. Ms. Black? No. Ms. Black? No. Mr. Ribble? No. Mr. Ribble? No. Mr. Flores? No. Mr. Flores? No. Mr. Rokita? No. Mr. Rokita? No. Mr. Woodall? No. Mr. Woodall? No. Ms. Blackburn? Ms. Blackburn? No. Mr. Nunnally? No. Mr. Nunnally? No. Mr. Ridgell? No. Mr. Ridgell? No. Ms. Hartzler? No. Ms. Hartzler? No. Ms. Walarski? No. Ms. Walarski? No. Mr. Messer? No. Mr. Messer? No. Mr. Rice? No. Mr. Rice? No. Mr. Williams? No. Mr. Williams? No. Mr. Duffy? No. Mr. Duffy? No. Mr. Cole? No. Mr. Cole? No. Mr. Van Hollen? Yes. Mr. Van Hollen? Aye. Mr. Yarmouth? Aye. Mr. Yarmouth? Aye. Mr. Pascarell?
Family unification, yes.
Mr. Pascarell? Aye. Mr. Ryan? Ms. Moore? Aye. Ms. Moore? Aye. Ms. Castor? Aye. Ms. Castor? Aye. Mr. McDermott? Ms. Lee?
For Pathway to Citizenship, aye.
Ms. Lee? Aye. Mr. Jeffries? Aye. Mr. Jeffries? Aye. Mr. Pocan? Aye. Mr. Pocan? Aye. Ms. Luan Grisham? Aye. Ms. Luan Grisham? Aye. Mr. Huffman? Aye. Mr. Huffman? Aye. Mr. Cárdenas?
For the sake of our economy, aye.
Mr. Cárdenas? Aye. Mr. Blumenauer? Mr. Blumenauer? Aye. Mr. Schrader? Aye. Mr. Schrader? Aye. Mr. Doggett? Aye. Mr. Doggett? Aye. Mr. Kildee?
Aye.
Mr. Kildee? Aye. Mr. Chairman?
No.
Mr. Chairman? No.
Are there any members wishing to vote or to change their vote? If not, the clerk shall report.
Mr. Chairman, on that vote, the ayes are 15, the noes are 21.
Ayes 15, noes 21. The amendment is not agreed to.